Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Alder Hour, your favourite way to end the working day. It's 8 o'clock here in Scotland. It's probably some different time where you are, but as long as we're past midday, we're heading towards the end of the working day, so we can still celebrate together. I'm Matt Alder. I host the Recruiting Future podcast, and I also host the Alder Hour. And this is show number 18. We have finally come of age. We can get a drink in a British pub. We are show number 18. This show is part of the Purple Acorn Network. Head over to purpleacornnetwork.com after the show. Not now. Watch the show now. If you want to learn more, you can also follow Purple Acorn on LinkedIn, and make sure you do, because therefore then you'll get all of their great shows. This episode will also be available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you're watching us live, and I really hope you are, we've got some really, really interesting content coming up over the next hour. So would really appreciate your comments. So dive in, send us some comments. We'll look out for them and try and reply to them wherever we can. So to kick things off, I would like to welcome this week's two co-hosts to the show. Here they are. Hi, Jocelyn. Welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, Matt. Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good for a Monday. And Rona's not with us this week. And Rona, we're missing you already. However, we have Jackye standing in, which is amazing. Jackye, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. So another show. What do you guys have for us this week? So Jocelyn, what's your segment about?
Yeah, so mine's actually pretty crazy. I'll give some HR advice to this, but just from a pure entertainment perspective, it's a good one. So it's about a gentleman who was called a work husband by somebody else at work. He felt very uncomfortable about it. It turned into this very dramatic story that we can talk about a little later. And the question is, he in return called her a work sister. Should he have done that? Is he the jerk in this situation? So we'll uncover all of that.
Well, I can't wait for that. Jackye, what do you have for us on trending and ending this week?
Well, we're going after the sacred cow that people have heard about. We are going to be looking at meetings. Are they helping us move or just clogging up our calendars?
Well, I'm looking forward to both of these discussions. I think they're going to be amazing. Without further ado, let's move on to Points and Pints. Now, if you haven't watched this part of the show before, what we do is we crack open our favorite beverage, or at least our beverage this week, and discuss some things that we found in the news. So last week I was drinking a Japanese beer brewed in Europe, and it was very, very confusing. So this week, after my international global trade extravaganza, I'm drinking a beer brewed in Scotland, Brewdog. However, I noticed that it's a New England IPA, so American-style beer brewed in Scotland. There we are. So let's just open this up, and we'll give it a go. It's called, made by Brewdog, and it's called Hazy AF. Hazy standing for alcohol-free. I don't know what you thought it stood for, but it stands for alcohol-free, because we know what happens when I drink on this show, when I drink alcohol. Here we go. Let's give it a go. I like this one. Jocelyn, what are you drinking? What do you have?
I'm never prepared for this part of the show, Matt. I'm drinking water right now.
We've only done it 18 times. That's okay. Jackye, it's your first time. Did you bring a drink? Did they brief you to bring a drink?
I did, but it's Dr. Pepper. Did you know that Dr. Pepper was made right here in Waco, Texas? See, I have to shout out for the hometown crowd.
There we go. What is in Dr. Pepper? What is it?
I don't know. I don't know.
Does anyone actually know what Dr.
37 flavors, but they never tell you what the flavors are.
It's a mystery. A bit like our first article. So this is a really interesting article. It's one of the strangest written articles I've read for quite some time. So is your boss actually an algorithm? So the article starts off by sort of painting a fairly dystopian picture of what would happen if you worked for an algorithm. It says an algorithm, I'm presuming it kind of means a sort of AI or something like that. And it talks about the issues with that. So the lack of human context, the de-skilling by taking away human judgment. If everything's kind of run by this machine. And also the not understanding the organizational context of things. So not appreciating fundamental human needs. Then the article takes a kind of a slight left turn and argues that actually maybe you're already working for an algorithm. So either you've got a bad boss who behaves like a robot, or actually the processes and everything that you follow are kind of very sort of very, very robotic, as it were. And I thought this was kind of interesting because there are already jobs out there where people are effectively working for a machine or a robot. I'm thinking people who work in warehouses, delivery drivers, things like that, where you literally have something giving you instructions all the time. I kind of read this and I thought, do you know what? As dystopian as this sounds, unfortunately, I really think it's going to happen. And the article goes on to suggest some ways of actually making this more manageable and making this more collaborative. So it sort of talks about, introducing the algorithm to your team as if it's a team member and kind of working with it. So a very strange article, but it does bring up some really interesting points about humans effectively working for machines. Justin, have you got any thoughts on this?
I hate that. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, right? Excuse me. I think that when you are reporting to some form of a machine, it almost dehumanizes your experience in the workplace and would certainly be impacting morale, would be impacting engagement, and therefore overall productivity, which is unfortunate. But I really do think that it would impact the person as well, is how am I in a position where I'm reporting into a machine? That type of question. So I find this to be a terrifying thought. Today, with where things are, I couldn't imagine it happening. But, there's so many changes that are going on right now in the world of AI that you just don't know what will happen. I would simply say, as a word of caution, we've talked about this idea of like a CHRAIO type role, right?
Yeah.
If we were to consider AI as a member of the workforce, what are we doing to prepare our workforce for that? And that's what I would really take away from something like this.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Jackye, what do you think? Are we already working for algorithms? Should we work for algorithms? What's your view?
I think we have made that pivot. I mean, but a lot of people are acting like machines or acting like that, but this isn't a tech problem. Like, it isn't something that we have to deal with from that perspective. It's really a leadership crisis problem. We've seen people already start hiding behind the automation. If you go back, there's a large box company that we all know of that got sued because they were saying that their product was biased. No, it wasn't the product. It was the people behind the product. We've been started and we've seen for a long time people try to hide between these machines. But the real issue isn't that AI is taking over. It's that too many companies are using it to avoid responsibility. And you can't really outsource true leadership. Right? If you strip out care and you start treating humans like output machines, they're broken by design. And that's what we've started seeing, and why for so long we've heard, put the human back in HR, right? Like all of those things. It's because we've stopped doing that years ago. And so we really need to get back into giving our leaders the ability and autonomy and skills needed to manage more effectively.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that. Anymore. I think that's a critical thing. And we're at this critical time. We're at this time where AI can do all this. AI can do things that we didn't think were possible. It's likely that in a year's time, 2 years' time, that scope's going to expand. And I think these are critical conversations and issues that we need to be having right now. And I don't think there are enough conversations on topics like this. whether it's in our industry or at government level or whatever it is, really looking at the kind of implications of it. And I had a bit of a thought around this, which isn't meant to sound controversial, or dystopian. It's just thinking about the natural progression of things. And it was like, if humans can be managed by an algorithm, does that mean that they're doing a job that humans shouldn't be doing? If that makes sense. So as we kind of move forward and AI can do kind of more stuff, what is the value that humans bring to work? And if humans coming to work can be managed by a robot, then they're not being human. So, is it the right job for them? Does that make sense? I literally just thought of that as we were talking. Does that make sense? Is that something to think about for the way forward?
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And that's part of this issue. I think specifically when we talk about HR, there's so much gatekeeping where we're trying to put so many things behind it. And maybe that's the part that should have been taken over. And unfortunately, some of these systems are doing the job better.
Mm.
Period.
Yeah.
You're not going to forget your AP system when they do their onboarding like a human would,
Yeah, and I think I suppose it's fundamentally about really kind of drilling down into, what is it that humans do that, AI can't match or can't do better. And again, I think that's the conversation that we should definitely be having. Food for thought, that one, even though it's a very strange article if you actually read it. Let's move on to the next one. So, over 80% of HR professionals struggling with rising costs and workforce planning challenges. Now, this article is principally based. It's a survey of 450 senior HR people in the UK, and the article is principally about there's been a rise in national insurance costs to employers in the UK, which has been a kind of a bit of a shock for lots of employers, and HR are kind of dealing with the fallout. So I'm not going to go too much into that because that's very much a kind of a UK issue. However, there's some interesting numbers in this survey. It's also, again, a really strange article because some of the survey numbers are quite sort of depressing in terms of how people are dealing with economic challenges. But the copy that's been written makes it seem like HR is conquering the world and incredibly positive and all this sort of stuff. And I'm always pleased to read things like that, but I wasn't entirely convinced it was true. So for the purposes of discussion, I've kind of picked out some of the numbers to see what we think of them and whether they're perhaps replicated in other geographies apart from the UK. So I did find this one quite interesting. 72.5% of HR leaders interviewed said their role has got more strategic in the last few years. What do we think to that? Does that ring true? Jocelyn, does that ring true with you?
Yeah, I would say so. I that definitely resonates for me, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've embraced technology more, and that's allowed us to focus more on strategic initiatives over the administrative burden that we might have previously been focused on.
Jackye, your thoughts on that? People getting more strategic?
I think they're getting more strategic. For years, people begged for a seat at the table, and that's what this means. If you want to have a seat at the table, then you have to strategize to align your processes to go with what your business goals are, which means more strategy. And it also means evolving. And I think that's what we're seeing is the rising costs and planning challenges, because now all of our secrets have been exposed and we have to evolve with the business.
And it's kind of table stakes, isn't it? As you say, it's like being strategic. That should be what the job's about. 60% rank ED&I as a high or moderate priority. And I think that certainly kind of rings true in the UK. How does that kind of sit in the US with everything that's been kind of going on?
Don't get me on a soapbox. I mean, the people are terrified and really afraid of doing this. And lately, I think, but we're starting to see more and more challenges that we know can be solved through the things that we do with DEI or EDI work.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're seeing people who have receded and retreated on their commitment to EDI. Now they're going back on their go back. Like they're trying to figure out ways of working it in because they figure out the importance of it. But we haven't seen a sweeping new adoption or re-adoption of EDI here in the States.
No, absolutely.
I think what we're seeing more of, Matt, is a lot of CEOs or CFOs or COOs that had never been bought into this idea of EDI, and felt like they kind of had to be because that's the HR thing to do, and have now used this as an opportunity to hamper HR's ability to focus more on EDI initiatives and overall strategy.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, final one. The article spins this as a massive positive. I really don't think this is a very positive number, but a massive 17.9. I don't know why they don't round these percentages up, but that's a whole other thing. A massive 17.9% are using AI tools. This is amazing, apparently. I mean, seriously, that's just, I find that number shocking. What do you think? What do you think to that?
They need to get with it. We need to get with it. I mean,
Yeah.
before it evolves without us, right? We've worked hard to get here and be strategic and use all of this.
Yeah, and it's kind of like these 80%, 70% of people who are being really strategic, but most of them aren't using AI tools. So I don't
What are they using?
I don't know. What do you think, Jocelyn?
Well, you have to think of the fact that it took a very long time for HR to really seek tech adoption in the first place, because it was hard for them to understand the way that those types of integrations and transformations worked. Perhaps because, tech just isn't in our wheelhouse as much, and so it's a little intimidating. So I'm not surprised to hear that, but I'm disappointed to hear that those are the numbers, because you can use AI in so many different ways in your life, right? In your personal life, in your professional life. And it can be something as simple as a tool that is helping you reorganize your email inbox. But when we're not embracing that technology and we don't have anybody spearheading the education piece behind it, and by that I mean really helping HR understand what AI is and how you can incorporate it into your day-to-day, but also into your business as well, and your overall strategy. We really need someone like that who can help spearhead that for the HR community, because otherwise I do think it's going to be a drag.
Yeah, and I think I agree with the bit about education. Last week we had a long chat about training and AI stuff, and I think people need that context. They need to know what's possible, the art of the possible. I think keeping up with what's possible with AI is probably the most difficult thing that there is to do. However, people have got to take some personal responsibility here. This is just happening. It's happening really quickly. And get on board, try it out, understand it, just carve some time out. It's not slowing down, and there isn't time to wait for someone to show you. I think that's what I'd say. So I think, definitely in that kind of business organizational context, but people also need to take some responsibility and just get on and do this. So quite the situation. Let's go on to the Situation Room. Right, I've been looking forward to this one. Let's start with this incredible Reddit thread that we've been working through.
Yeah, this one's pretty good. So let me set the stage here. This gentleman is at work. He has a friend at work named Mary, and they're at a happy hour. And in front of everybody at the office, she calls him her work husband and hugs him. And that made him feel really uncomfortable. So just kind of as a response, he was like, pat on the back, you're my work sister. And it became really awkward for them. They weren't talking. She came and kind of confronted him in his office, and she had accused him of all these things that he'd been doing that she felt was leading her on. And he said, no, absolutely not. I'm happily married. I meet with you for breakfast every day because I want to talk strategy for the day, not because I just want to meet you for breakfast every day, things like that. So she apologizes. The issue here is that they travel together. They travel together every week or every other week. It was making him feel really uncomfortable. So he went home, spoke to his wife, and decided that he was going to make a complaint talk to HR about it, not file a formal complaint, but speak to HR about it so they were aware. So this was kind of interesting. I didn't really understand it HR wise, but there are two other people in the office that also do the same job that travel as well. But they said because they work so well together, they wanted to keep traveling together. So the company made Mary and this gentleman keep traveling together, which I thought was weird. As an HR person, you'd think, well, too bad. I know you like traveling with this person, but we have an issue going on and it needs to be resolved. But nonetheless, they have them traveling together, and he just kind of keeps his distance from her. Then they hire a girl named Carolina. This is like the best part of the story.
Yeah.
They hire this girl named Carolina for the job, and they say, hey, we want you to train her. 1 week you'll travel with her. 1 week she'll travel with Mary. So he was thrilled with that because it cut the amount of time that he was having to travel with Mary. And he made a big point to be very professional, not go out for drinks afterward, not meet up for breakfast, the whole deal. And she was very professional as well. And when he came into work that following Monday, apparently there'd been some complaint made to HR about Carolina sexually harassing somebody at work. And apparently somebody got into Carolina's phone, took pictures that she had taken of herself that she'd sent to her boyfriend, sent them to HR, and said that she was sending that to somebody at work, and a few other things that they said that she had done. And so she was in trouble, and she didn't know if she was going to be able to keep her job. And Mary was thrilled. Mary was thrilled because it meant that she got to keep traveling with this gentleman. She started calling this woman a pervert. She started saying all this horrible stuff about this individual. And the article kind of finishes there. I mean, hopefully he gives us another update in the future. I will definitely be tracking that on Reddit. But, the big question for him was, am I being a jerk in this situation? Right. And it's absolutely not. I mean, more than likely, Mary's the one who's framed this woman, which sounds totally insane. But just when you read through the story, it kind of adds up a little bit, which is just psychotic behavior. And so there's definitely an HR problem going on that hasn't truly been resolved at this organization. Really, what they should have done from the very beginning is separated them and not had them travel together at all. I do wonder, Matt, if it had been the other way around, if it had been a woman who was feeling uncomfortable about a male colleague, would HR have made her continue to travel with him? Probably not.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I couldn't work out whether we were looking at an HR issue or a whodunit story. I was waiting for the final. I'm waiting for the final chapter to see what happens. I mean, it's a crazy sort of story and it's a crazy situation, but it does relate to a kind of a very serious issue about people making other people feel uncomfortable. The amount of time that some people have to spend, particularly when they're traveling, and you don't get to choose your work colleagues, and you don't necessarily get to choose who you travel with or spend all that time with. And I think that's a consideration that organizations should think about if they're forcing people to kind of interact with each other all the time, kind of on the road and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's kind of one part of it in terms of understanding the dynamics there. But also I think this sort of work wife, work husband thing sort of appears to be sort of quite common parlance. I've heard it sort of used quite a lot by people who work together quite closely and all that sort of stuff. And I think that this kind of really illustrates the fact that people can feel very uncomfortable with that. Some people can be fine with it, but people can feel very uncomfortable with with that kind of terminology. And I think that's kind of really where this sort of starts, basically. So yeah, it's a kind of a really interesting one, but I think there is that serious point behind it about sort of really understanding those boundaries, understanding the way that other people sort of feel and think about these things, and the pressure that people are under sometimes when they have to spend so much time together, particularly when they're traveling all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And we were talking about this before the show. Do you think, calling someone work husband or work wife is an okay thing to do? And I think kind of across the board, the three of us felt like, hey, probably not. I wouldn't say that it's something somebody should get in trouble for necessarily, but I do think that it's a cultural thing that might need to be reevaluated.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things about this is the Mary, if that's indeed her real name, initially takes offence because she calls him her work husband, and he then panics and calls her his work sister, which she doesn't like. And it's just like, yeah, you're my work cousin. You're my. It's just it's just very strange, and it's like, work isn't family, and I think I think everyone realizes that. So yeah, it's I'm sure you'll have to update us if there's another update on this, because I want to know who did it. But yeah, I think it raises some interesting points, and I think that cultural thing and how we describe people at work is the big thing that comes out of it, definitely. So thank you, Jocelyn, and we're moving on, and we have a guest dialing in. Hey, Kennedy, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? I love that beeping. That was so cute.
No, I thought it was genuinely your phone then.
What do you mean?
Yeah, of course it was. Of course it was. Well, brilliant to talk to you. Could you, for the benefit of everyone watching, just introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Kennedy Cook. I am our head of startup at Unleash. And for those of you who are not familiar with Unleash, we have 2 events every year. We have one in Vegas called Unleash America, and we have one in Paris called Unleash World, and we are an HR tech events company.
Fantastic. I've always been a big fan of Unleash. Great events. Really looking forward to being at the one in Vegas in 3 weeks time now? 3 weeks
3
time?
weeks time, 3
Wow.
weeks to go.
That's not very long at all. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about that a little bit later, because I'm interested
Yeah.
to get a bit of a preview about what's going on. But let's talk about your role. So what is it you do for Unleash, and how did you get to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take it from the top. So basically how I got into it was I started living in Budapest, and I met Mark when I was in Budapest. So I went to Budapest originally on my study abroad, and I was in between Budapest and Krakow, ended up in Budapest, and then I had accepted a job in DC. It's my last semester of university. Got accepted to Johns Hopkins to do my master's in political communications. I was there for about 3 weeks. I call my mom up and I'm like, I know this sounds a bit crazy, but what if I walked away from the job and Johns Hopkins and tried to move to Europe? No intention to stay in Budapest whatsoever. And her and my stepdad. So my family, my mom is Julie Sowash, and my stepdad is Chad Sowash. They were the only 2 people in my family who supported me making this move, which is pretty wild in hindsight.
Yeah.
And so they were like, our friend Mark Coleman lives in Budapest. Why don't you try to see if you can have a meeting with him? Because the big question that I was kind of facing was, as I was making all of these peers in, Budapest and at my university, everyone has a master's, and I did not have a master's. So I didn't really know if I was going to be employable. And so I send Mark a message on LinkedIn. I'm like, hi, Mark. Nice to meet you. I think I'm like 21, 22 at this point. And I'm like, would you be willing to meet me for a meeting? And so he agrees. And I think we rescheduled probably 5 times. He was like, I have COVID. I'm like, I have COVID. I'm out of town. So, anyways, we end up meeting at a Starbucks next to their old office. And the thing is Mark and I just clicked right away. And I loved when we started talking. It was kind of about something, it was a bit more personal. And then we kind of gradually got into work. And he told me, he was like, I have this startup program that was really big before COVID. And he's like, it's been kind of leveled. He said, could I give it to you to perhaps work on with our startup salesperson? And so a couple months later, it took me about 5 months to get my work visa to come through. But he offered me a job pretty much on the spot. I still had to do all the interviews after, of course. And he's like, do you want to stay? And I was like, let's do it. So it felt like one of those moments that were meant to be. And then, so I started working on startup.
Fantastic. So from kind of political theory science to HR tech,
Yes.
it's a bit of a shift. So
100%.
tell us about the startup program. How does it work? What does it entail?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started working on it with Aniko, who's our startup salesperson, my partner in crime, as I like to call her, I think we had 30 startups at Unleash World. And so then at that time, all they had was the startup award. So we kind of all started working together. How do we bring in, other elements to make it a bit more exciting? And that's when Mark was like, gave me the keys and the creativity and the freedom. And he's like, do whatever you think, will work. And so at that point, then we wanted to focus on how do we create community? How do we create connections? How do we create opportunities? Because through my mom and Chad, I got to see the power that is this amazing community. And how do you kind of bring that to life? And so then we started having, okay, let's have a startup workshop, which we did for the very first time at Unleash America last year. And it is coming back this year. Let's have a startup drinks connection or reception. Let's get everybody kind of mixing and mingling. Let's bring the investors. Of course, I also run the Unleash Startup Award from top to bottom, everything in between. That is all me. And we also introduced the startup guided tours, which I like to call, they're like, when you go to like Barcelona or something and you go on one of those free walking tours, it's like that. Like you can see me around the expo hall giving my tours like this with my sign. It's quite fun.
Holding an umbrella saying, follow me and all that.
Yes, with the umbrella, except this time I have a pink light up sign. I often go up and down like this.
And what's going on in the startup world at the moment? Kind of what you're seeing from the companies that you're talking to. Is it thriving? Are people getting investment? Is it all AI? What's the landscape look like?
I mean, AI is certainly a huge, huge piece, right? So, I mean, I would say 90% of the startups I've come across in the past couple of years have an AI element to their product, if not the entire thing. I also keep seeing talent and recruitment still being a really large segment, specifically in the US market. So when we work with Unleash America, that's primarily who I see. When we're over at Unleashed World, I see more of like a straight HR tech kind of crowd. But I would say people are definitely struggling at the minute, I think, with the economy. As we've seen all of these tariffs put in, it immediately kind of created hesitation for people to decide really what they want to spend their money on. And I think people were just kind of waiting to see what would happen, which ultimately has an impact. I mean, when you work in startups, your budget is so tight, and the type of decisions you make about where you're going to put your money is ultimately pretty last minute.
And from a startup competition perspective, so sadly, I'm now old enough to have been to conferences for a very long time, and I can remember, startup competitions years and years ago, and some of the companies that won those going on to become really big companies, and then other companies just sort of disappearing and never being heard of again. What is it that is going to make someone win the startup award this year? And where's the longevity sort of come from, do you think, at the moment?
Definitely. I think like if you're talking about in regards to a pitch per se, I always tell people, I'm like, you want to tell a story. You need the classic ethos, logos, and pathos, right? You have to also bring in the credibility. Who are your clients? Like, be exciting. Who are the testimonials? Where do you see it going? I'm like, name drop all that you can. And for those startups who I've seen really be successful, I mean, for example, I'm thinking of Job Pixel, Plum, Juicebox is one that was in the startup competition last year, and now they're thriving. Those people, I think they're also quite good at knowing when to scale and how to scale And I think that's a huge thing for startup founders. And I think sometimes you might need to bring in external advice, but really I think a term I like to use all the time is like play your cards right. And I think when you're in that kind of position and you're scaling, you have to think about what is a priority and where you need to prioritize not only your time, but your money and your attention.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and it's it's such a dynamic space. It's always great to see loads of startups. I
So
love
fun.
the startup areas at events because this is this is where a lot of the new ideas are going to come from. People thinking about things differently, and it's just fantastic to see conferences supporting them, basically. And on that note, tell us about Unleash America. What's coming up in 3 weeks' time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Unleash America is May 6th through 8th in Viva Las Vegas at Caesars Forum. So this year, some of our headline sponsors include Deloitte, HiBob, SAP, Vizier, Workday, Indeed, HiBob, and so many more. On the startup side, we will have about 50 plus startups in attendance. And we have some really exciting speakers. So we have Max Tegmark, apologies if I've butchered his name, and he's a professor at MIT. We also have Josh Bersin speaking too, and a couple of AI experts.
Fantastic. And what are you looking forward to the most?
I always look forward to, I think, the Startup Award because it's something like I almost get kind of nervous for them as
Yeah.
they're going up on stage, but I love hyping them up and seeing the journey from when we've met and, what we're kind of talking about and going through their pitch decks and how can I, make my presentation like stand out. And I get to select the judges. So seeing them and getting their feedback and just seeing the thing that you've worked on for 6 months come to life and be in front of you. And it's always crazy at the end of the hour. You're like, I just spent 6 months working on that and now it's done. That's it.
Fantastic.
That's it.
And so I'm going to be there. Jackie's going to be there. Justin's currently on the fence, but we're trying to sort of tip her over to go. What do you recommend we do when we're there? What's your top recommendations for things to see and do at Unleash?
Oh gosh. I think this year we are having a nice drinks reception on the Summit Plaza. I think coming and doing a bit of mixing and mingling. It's so fun because you can always hear everybody screaming in the halls when they're having a reunion and it's like, ah! And so I just always love like kind of watching the pure happiness that comes up on people's faces. I think, of course, catching our keynote speakers on main stage is a great place to start. Joining one of the startup guided tours, talent and recruitment. Anybody?
Of
Matt?
course, yeah. Count me in, definitely.
Count me in. Not being forced.
Yeah, no, 1,000,000%. I'd love to. That would be
What do
brilliant.
you
Awesome.
mean? Yes.
So fantastic. So really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for talking to us. And see you in 3 weeks' time.
See you in 3 weeks. Thank you, Matt.
Pleasure. Right, let's go to trending or ending. Hey, Jackye, welcome back.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Are you enjoying the show so far?
I am. This is fun.
It is fun, isn't it? It is fun. We get to talk about whatever we like. It's great.
I love it.
Speaking of which, what is trending or ending this week?
So we're looking again, calling it the sacred cow of all offices, meetings. The question is like, are we having the right amount of meetings or could it have been an email?
Cool. And what do you think? Are we having the right amount of meetings? What's your view on it?
I don't mind good meetings. I don't think people mind good meetings, but looking at statistics, and we all know that 35% of all statistics are made up. But it said that people are spending 31 hours a month in meetings and only consider 50% of that time to be productive.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we're having all of these meetings and they're not bringing us forward or being more strategic, then that's a problem. But what's curious is, has it changed the level of productivity that wasn't addressed enough, or maybe we haven't done it, is the going back to work part, right? Because we know at one point, everything was a meeting just because we were all remote.
Yeah, of course.
Um, and so we got used to when we needed to have a conversation that I might have just walked by your desk on my way to grab a coffee. Now I have to set up and schedule time to make sure that we can have that piece of conversation. And so I feel like so many things could just be an email, and probably better off doing that in the first place.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think the 50% thing is quite interesting because the the amount of time in my career I spent going to meetings about meetings, or sometimes
Right.
meetings about meetings, or even a pre-meeting about a meeting about a meeting about a meeting, which is just kind of insane. And also people having regular meetings where nothing happened, but we did it because it was regular. And also people having meetings for an hour because that's what the calendar defaulted to, rather than, picking another time. So, I hate meetings from that perspective. Having said that, I've been to some amazing meetings with kind of unexpected sort of breakthroughs, people doing amazing things I wouldn't have known about, building consensus, getting support around difficult decisions, and that kind of human connection, which everyone keeps banging on about. So that must be important. So, it's kind of a 50-50 thing. And I think we've obviously got, all this kind of technology now and auto scheduling and all these kind of things that have sort of changed the way that meetings can be organized and structured. But it just seems we haven't kind of taken the leap to really understand why we have meetings and make them more productive. I mean, do you think what could happen to fix this with people who are struggling with pointless, unproductive meetings?
Well, I think what you said says a lot about what the challenge is. You were able to point to good meetings where people were talking about very specific things. They were trying to solve problems. You knew what was to expect, even if the point of the meeting is connection, fine. But one of the things that we have to look at is does this have to be a meeting? Are we having a meeting to actually get something done? Do we have especially an agenda? If I'm meeting with you and you don't, and it has to be an hour, especially if it's an hour, I would expect agenda. If you don't give me an agenda, if it's 30 minutes, I feel like we are just bantering back and forth. And then I should have the ability, you could have a policy where if it's 30 minutes, I just want to catch up with you so that you can reject those if you need to spend this being more productive. And so I wouldn't mind being in meetings all day if we actually measured what we were talking about. It was specific. You had an agenda. You told people what to prepare for in advance so that they could have a better meeting when they're there, and also give that feedback with expectations and action items back to the team so they can be ready for the next meeting. So we don't just keep having it because we meet every Thursday after lunch.
Yeah, and I think the other bit about meetings, which I think comes back to the bit where I was talking about meetings and pre-meetings about pre-meetings and things like that. I had a lot of those where I was very much in an environment where meetings were a very political thing. Who said what? Who looked good in front of the CEO? And all that sort of stuff. And I used to hate that kind of thing, but I'm sure it still sort of happens. And I would hope that we could move away from that with some of the tools that we've got. I mean, I remember once having a meeting with a law firm about it was when I was working in ad agency land, and we were sort of meeting with them to talk about potentially doing a project with them. They walked in org structure hierarchical order and sat in that order, and then only certain people could talk to other people, and it was just, this is unbelievable, just like. But then we were like, oh, we need to mirror that, so we did it as well, and it was like, what are we doing? What is going on? How is this productive or anything else? So yeah, I mean, how do we move away from those kind of meetings if people are kind of still sort of suffering from that sort of political, performative sort of style of meeting?
I'm sorry, that's a culture issue. Like, that is so deep. I mean, it's embedded. I know I've worked, one of the things that you talk about meetings and the political piece with all of these tools. The first part of the political bit is the meeting before the meeting where you talk about the meeting on Slack, right? Because that's the worst. I got called into HR once because they noticed that I wasn't telling people happy birthday or liking the post,
Wow.
and wanted me to know that everybody noticed that I didn't do that. So here's the secret. Like, people know that I'm ADHD. If I don't do it, I'm not going to do it. And then I just gave myself grace because I will get fully distracted and I turn off Slack. All of a sudden it's like, so people who are neurospicy or a little bit different don't get this piece at all. And so if you have those political meetings, first, make sure that you recognize the culture, see if you can find the bit where it's getting in the way. But then also look at those tools in advance to say, because Slack will tell you everything that you need to know about how the meeting's going to go. If you're using those tools, how are people talking about it? Is everybody engaged? Do people seem upset? Do we have these attachments? Because that's a piece that we have to acknowledge. And I would hope, going back to what we talked about earlier, that people would be implementing DEIB or EDI, depending on where you are, what you refer to it as. These are the things that can be helpful in making sure that you set the structure to have a level playing field. And when you walk into these meetings, you should feel like everyone's on an even playing field. There's no hierarchy. We know what to expect. We know what we're discussing. We all had time to be prepared. And stop creating environments and meetings where you're trying to stump people and measure how fast they are at coming up with witty things that will attract the whole group.
Yeah, and I think also with, particularly what struck me before the pandemic was I had quite a few CEOs come on the podcast who ran remote first businesses. So at the start of the business, completely remote. At the time, it was just incredible that someone could do that. But what really kind of struck me was they got their kind of culture of meetings and collaborative work, spot on. They used collaborative documents. They only had meetings when they had to have them. If it was a meeting to kind of, build connection, that's what it was. And everyone was kind of informed all the time in terms of how things were working. And I suppose what I hoped during the pandemic, where everything sort of moved on to Zoom and all this kind of stuff, that companies would kind of mirror that sort of energy, that way of thinking. And, I think sadly we still see, lots of companies dealing with, meetings and communication in the same way that they always have, which is a real shame.
Well, and I think a lot of it is really a trust issue. I mean, I always say I'm a closet introvert. People don't know that I'm really introverted. I've worked at home for over 15 years. And so when we started doing the pandemic, I felt so invaded because I don't talk to anyone. I just put my head down. Now all of a sudden people want to talk, they want to engage. And I'm like, what? You're in my space. Now you're in my home. And it's so key that we look at what we're creating with all of these various meetings and recognizing we have to trust people to do their job. We don't have to know everything. It's not a right. But that being said, if you don't have the information on your own, that's on purpose. With all of the various ways of getting information, the different tools that we use on a regular basis, all of the internal, ways that we can communicate. At this point, if you don't have the information, you've ignored it. You don't have a plan for it. It's available for those who are looking for it in most organizations.
No, absolutely. So I think we agreed that 50% of meetings are probably rubbish and not worth having.
Right.
If you're gonna have a meeting, then just have a reason for it and do it properly. Jackye, thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. That is us done. It's been the 18th show. It's been great fun. Lots of other great shows on the Purple Acorn Network, the HR Morning Show, My First Job, From the Desk, from X to Z, or is it from Z to X? Whichever one it is, it's a great show. So you can check them out by going to purpleacornnetwork.com or going to the Purple Acorn LinkedIn page. This show is also a podcast, so please check it out wherever you get your podcasts. While you're checking it out, check out Recruiting Future as well, because that's where you'll find all my longer form interviews. The Alder Hour will be back this time next Monday, and I'm already looking forward to it. This is Matt Alder, clocking out.